The December morning was already hot when Ibrahim Traoré's convoy departed from Ouagadougou, heading north toward the Sahel region. The president had insisted on visiting some of the villages affected by the ongoing conflict, despite the security risks. His advisors had argued against it, citing intelligence reports about insurgent activity in the area, but Ibrahim was determined. Too many decisions were being made in air-conditioned offices in the capital, too many policies crafted by people who had never seen the reality of life in the conflict zones. "These are our people," he had told Colonel Sawadogo during the planning meeting. "How can I lead them if I don't understand what they're enduring?" So now, as the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, 3 armored vehicles carrying the president and his security detail bounced along a rutted dirt road toward the village of Tinakov, a settlement of approximately 800 souls located in the northern province of Somme. Tinakov had been lucky, if such a word could be used for any village in this region. Unlike many settlements, it hadn't been completely abandoned during the insurgency. The people had stayed, though many families had sent their children to live with relatives in safer areas. Life continued in Tinakov, but it was life stripped to its essentials. Survival measured in days rather than years. Hope, a commodity as scarce as rain in the dry season. As the convoy approached the village, Ibrahim could see the typical architecture of the Sahel: low mud brick houses with flat roofs, small compounds surrounded by thorn bush fences, a few goats wandering in search of vegetation. But he also noticed what wasn't there: no children playing in the streets, no women gathered at the well, no men sitting in the shade discussing village affairs. The emptiness was eerie, unsettling. The vehicles came to a stop in the center of the village, and Ibrahim's security team immediately established a perimeter. The village chief, a man named Umaru, who appeared to be in his 60s, though he was probably younger, emerged from one of the compounds. He walked slowly, with the careful movements of someone who had learned that sudden gestures could be dangerous. "Mr. President," Umaru said, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. "We did not expect this visit. If we had known, we would have prepared a proper welcome." Ibrahim shook the man's hand warmly. "I don't need preparations, Chief. I came to see how you and your people are managing, to understand what you need." Umaru's eyes filled with tears at these words, and he turned away for a moment to compose himself. When he turned back, his face was set with determination. "Come, let me show you our village. Let me show you what we have become." They walked through Tinakov, and with each step, Ibrahim's heart grew heavier. The school building stood empty, its doors and windows long since removed. The blackboard inside faded and cracked. The health clinic was locked, abandoned after the nurse had fled following threats from insurgents. The market area, which should have been bustling even on a regular day, contained only a few desperate vendors selling wilted vegetables and small amounts of millet. "How many people remain?" Ibrahim asked quietly. "About 300 now," Umaru replied. "Many left when the attacks became frequent. Those who stayed are mostly the old, those too poor to relocate, or those too stubborn to abandon their ancestors' land." Ibrahim understood. In Burkinabe culture, land was more than property. It was connection to history, to family, to identity. Asking people to leave their land was asking them to sever their roots. As they walked, a dog suddenly appeared from between 2 compounds. It was a thin, scraggly animal, ribs visible beneath its dusty brown coat. The dog ran past them without acknowledgement, barking frantically, its voice hoarse as if it had been barking for hours. "That dog has been making noise all morning," Umaru said with irritation, running back and forth to the old well at the edge of the village. "No one knows what has gotten into it." Ibrahim watched the dog disappear around a corner, still barking. Something about the animal's behavior struck him as odd. This wasn't the casual barking of a village dog. There was urgency in it, almost desperation. "The old well?" Ibrahim asked. "Which one is that?" Umaru waved his hand dismissively. "One of the traditional wells that dried up years ago. We sealed it because it was dangerous. Children playing near it could fall in. Now it's just abandoned, useless." But the dog's barking continued, echoing through the quiet village, insistent and unrelenting. Ibrahim found himself drawn toward the sound, his instincts from years of military service telling him that something was wrong. "Show me this well," he said. Umaru looked confused. "Mr. President, it's just an old dry well. There's nothing to see." "Humor me," Ibrahim said with a slight smile, but his tone made it clear this was not a suggestion. Umaru shrugged and led the way, with Ibrahim's security team falling into formation around them. They walked to the western edge of the village, where the settlement gave way to scrubland and scattered acacia trees. The old well stood there, a circular structure of stacked stones about 3 feet high, with wooden boards nailed across the top as a makeshift cover. The dog was there, standing at the edge of the well, barking down into it with single-minded focus. When the humans approached, it glanced at them briefly, then returned to its barking, pacing back and forth, occasionally scratching at the wooden boards. "You see?" Umaru said. "Just a crazy dog. Perhaps it smells a snake or a rodent inside." But Ibrahim stepped closer, and as he did, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Between the dog's barks, in the brief moments of silence, there was another sound. Faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakable once you knew to listen for it. Voices, human voices, coming from inside the well. Depict, Chapter 2. Ibrahim held up his hand, demanding silence. The dog, as if understanding the gesture, stopped barking for a moment. In that pocket of quiet, everyone heard it. Voices from below, weak and desperate, calling for help. "Get these boards off immediately," Ibrahim commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. His security team sprang into action, prying at the wooden planks with tools from the vehicles. Umaru's face had gone pale. "But the well has been sealed for 3 years. How could anyone be inside?" The boards came free, clattering to the ground, and immediately the voices became clearer. Multiple people, perhaps 6 or 7 based on the different tones, crying out for help in Fulfulde, one of the local languages. Ibrahim dropped to his knees at the edge of the well, looking down into the darkness. "Hello," he called down. "We hear you. How many of you are down there?" A moment of stunned silence from below, then a man's voice, cracked and hoarse. "8 of us. Please, we need water. We've been here for 3 days." 3 days. Ibrahim's mind raced through the implications. 3 days without water in this heat, trapped in a dry well. These people were on the edge of death. "Colonel," Ibrahim said, turning to Sawadogo, "we need rope, water, medical supplies. Now." The security team had come prepared for various scenarios, but rescuing people from a well was not among them. Still, they had rope in the vehicles, water bottles, and a basic first aid kit. While his men retrieved these items, Ibrahim continued talking to the people below, keeping them calm, assuring them that rescue was coming. "What are your names?" he called down. "Tell me who you are." The same male voice responded, "I am Hamidou. With me are my wife Zainab, my mother Hawa, my 2 children, and 3 others from our village." "Which village?" "Kula. We fled when the insurgents came. We've been hiding, moving at night, trying to reach safety. We saw this village and thought we could ask for shelter, but then we heard gunfire and hid in the well. But the rope broke, and we couldn't climb out." Ibrahim's jaw clenched. These were displaced people, refugees in their own country, fleeing the violence that had torn apart so much of Burkina Faso. They had survived the insurgents only to become trapped, and would have died of thirst if not for a persistent dog and an unscheduled presidential visit. Umaru had been listening, and now his face showed shame. "We had gunfire 2 nights ago," he admitted. "A brief exchange between our self-defense militia and some insurgents passing through. I didn't know anyone was in the well." "If I had known—" "No one is blaming you," Ibrahim said firmly. "You didn't know, but now we do know, and we're going to get them out." The rope arrived, and Ibrahim's security team began the delicate operation. The well was deep, perhaps 40 feet, and the people inside were weak from dehydration and exposure. First, they lowered bottles of water, instructing those below to drink slowly, not to make themselves sick by consuming too much too quickly. Then came the question of extraction. The well was narrow, maybe 4 feet in diameter, and the walls were old stone that could crumble under stress. They would need to bring people up one at a time, carefully, with someone strong enough below to secure each person to the rope. "I'll go down," said one of Ibrahim's bodyguards, a young soldier named Amadou Diallo. "I'm the smallest on the security team." Ibrahim wanted to protest, wanted to go down himself, but he knew that would be foolish. His security team was trained for this. He was not. "Be careful," he said simply, gripping Amadou's shoulder. They rigged a harness from the rope, and Amadou descended into the darkness of the well. The watching crowd, which had grown as villagers emerged from their homes drawn by the commotion, held their collective breath. Minutes passed like hours. Then Amadou's voice echoed up from below. "I'm down, preparing to send up the first person." The first to come up was a child, a girl perhaps 6 years old, limp and barely conscious. As she emerged into the sunlight, one of the villagers, a woman who identified herself as a retired nurse, rushed forward and began checking the child's vital signs. The little girl's lips were cracked and bleeding, her skin hot with fever, but she was alive. "Water, slowly," the retired nurse instructed, "and we need to get her out of the sun." One by one, they brought up the trapped people. The second child, a boy of about 8. Then an elderly woman who had to be supported, her legs too weak to stand. A young mother who wept with relief as she was pulled from the well. Each emergence was a small miracle. Each life saved a victory against the odds. When the man who had first spoken, Hamidou, finally came up, he was the last. He had insisted on being extracted last, making sure everyone else got out first. As strong hands pulled him over the edge of the well, he collapsed onto the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Ibrahim knelt beside him, offering water from his own bottle. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "You're all safe." Hamidou looked at him, and recognition slowly dawned in his eyes despite his depleted state. You're the president, Captain Traoré." "Just Ibrahim," the president said, "and I'm grateful we found you in time." Chapter 3. As the rescued families recovered in the shade, drinking water carefully and receiving basic medical attention from the retired nurse and Ibrahim's security team, the full story emerged. Hamidou and his extended family had fled their village of Kula 8 days earlier when armed insurgents attacked at dawn. They had killed the village chief and several men who tried to defend their homes, then demanded that young men join their ranks and that young women be given to them as wives. "We ran," Hamidou said, his voice still weak but growing stronger with each sip of water. 23 of us from different families, mostly women and children and old people. The men who could fight stayed behind, hoping to buy us time to escape. We moved through the bush, hiding during the day, walking at night. We had little food and water was scarce. His wife Zainab, holding their daughter who was now sleeping fitfully, continued the story. "We lost people along the way. Some of the elderly couldn't keep up the pace. We had to leave them, with water and what food we could spare, hoping they would be found by people from other villages. It broke our hearts, but we had the children to think about. They had been traveling for 6 days when they spotted Tinakov in the distance. It was late afternoon, and they decided to approach the village carefully, sending Hamidou ahead to make contact. But before he could reach the village proper, they heard the gunfire that Umaru had mentioned, the skirmish between the local defense militia and passing insurgents. We didn't know who was shooting or why, Hamidou explained. All we knew was that gunfire meant danger. We saw this old well and thought we could hide inside until things were safe. There was an old rope, and we climbed down, but the rope was rotten, and when the last person was descending, it snapped. We were trapped. The first day in the well had been bearable, uncomfortable, but survivable. They had a little water left from their journey, and they believed someone would come looking for them once the village realized there were strangers in the well. But no one came. The village was on high alert after the firefight, and people stayed inside their compounds. The area around the old well was abandoned, considered unlucky by some villagers who remembered when a child had nearly fallen in years ago. By the second day, their water was gone. The heat was brutal, even in the relative shade of the well. Children cried. The elderly woman, Hamidou's mother Hawa, began to drift in and out of consciousness. They called for help, but their voices didn't carry far enough, muffled by the stone walls and the distance from the village center. On the third day, which was this morning, they had begun to lose hope. Hawa was no longer responding. 2 of the children were listless and feverish, and Hamidou knew they were running out of time. They prayed, each according to their faith, asking for a miracle, and then they heard the barking. At first, it was just background noise, another element of their suffering. But the barking persisted, getting closer, and eventually they realized the dog was right above them. They called out with what strength they had left, hoping the dog's behavior would attract attention. For hours, they heard the dog barking, running away, then returning to bark some more. They had begun to think it was futile when suddenly, impossibly, They heard human voices. And then the most shocking thing of all, they heard the president's voice. "Why were you traveling to Tinakov?" Ibrahim asked. "Did you have family here?" Hamidou shook his head. "No family. But we knew it was a village that still existed, that hadn't been completely destroyed. We hoped for shelter, for help, for a chance to rest and decide what to do next. Many people from our region have fled south, but the journey is long and dangerous. We thought perhaps we could stay in this area, find work, rebuild somewhere nearby." Ibrahim looked at Umaru, who was listening with a complex expression on his face. The village chief seemed torn between compassion for these suffering people and worry about his own village's limited resources. "Chief Umaru," Ibrahim said carefully, "can Tinakov accommodate these families, at least temporarily?" Umaru's face creased with concern. "Mr. President, we barely have enough for our own people. Our water supply is limited. Food is scarce. We have no school, no clinic, no way to provide proper care for sick children. I want to help, but I don't know how we can." It was the honest answer of a man carrying an impossible burden. Ibrahim understood. Burkina Faso was filled with villages like Tinakov, struggling to survive, unable to absorb more displaced people despite their desire to help. The humanitarian crisis had stretched everyone to their limits. "Then we'll do this differently," Ibrahim said, making a decision. "These families will come to Ouagadougou with me. We have facilities there, camps for displaced people, medical care, food distribution. They'll be taken care of." Hamidou's eyes widened. "The capital. Mr. President, we couldn't impose. We're simple village people. We don't belong in the city. You belong wherever you can be safe and have hope for a future," Ibrahim said firmly. "And right now, that's Ouagadougou. We'll get you settled, get your mother and the children proper medical treatment, and help you figure out next steps." The dog that had been barking, now quiet, sat near the well watching everything with intelligent eyes. Ibrahim walked over to it, kneeling down to stroke its dusty head. The dog accepted the affection calmly, as if it had known all along that its job would succeed. "This dog saved 8 lives today," Ibrahim said to the gathered villagers. "Does it belong to anyone?" Chapter 4. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old, stepped forward hesitantly. "It's my dog, Mr. President. His name is Wassa. It means courage in our language." Ibrahim smiled at the boy. "It's a good name. He lived up to it today. What's your name, son?" "Musa," the boy replied, gaining confidence. "Musa Dicko. Well, Musa Dicko, you have a very special dog. You should be proud of him." Musa beamed, and Ibrahim noticed how the small interaction brought life to the boy's face. In a village where joy was scarce, even small moments of recognition mattered. As arrangements were made to transport the rescued families to Ouagadougou, Ibrahim called his chief of staff. "I need you to prepare space in the Camp Wem Tenga facility," he instructed. 8 people, including 2 children and an elderly woman who needs immediate medical attention. I want a medical team standing by when we arrive." He could hear the surprise in his aide's voice on the other end of the line, but to the man's credit, he didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Yes, Mr. President, it will be ready." The next hour was spent organizing the return journey. The rescued families were given more water, some food from the supplies Ibrahim's convoy carried, and basic first aid. Hawa, the elderly woman, was in the worst condition, severely dehydrated with signs of heat exhaustion. One of Ibrahim's security team had emergency medical training and started an IV line using supplies from their medical kit, getting fluids into her system as quickly as was safe. The children, resilient as children often are, were already recovering. Given water and some fruit, they sat in the shade eating slowly, their eyes wide as they took in the unusual sight of presidential vehicles and armed security personnel in their temporary refuge village. Before leaving, Ibrahim took time to speak with the villagers of Tinakov, to hear their concerns and understand their needs. They spoke of their fear, living on the edge of insurgent territory, never knowing when an attack might come. They spoke of the water shortage, how their one functioning borehole was starting to show signs of depletion. They spoke of the school that had closed, the children who were growing up without education. "I cannot promise immediate solutions," Ibrahim told them honestly. "The challenges we face as a nation are enormous, but I promise I hear you, and I will not forget Tinakov. Your resilience, your determination to stay on your land despite everything, is what Burkina Faso needs. Umaru clasped Ibrahim's hand. Thank you for coming, Mr. President. Thank you for seeing us. Sometimes, that alone gives us the strength to continue. As the convoy prepared to depart, now with 8 additional passengers distributed among the vehicles, Ibrahim took one last look at the old well. It had been abandoned, considered useless, even dangerous. Yet it had sheltered 8 people when they desperately needed protection, and its very presence, marked by a persistent dog's barking, had led to their rescue. There was a lesson there, Ibrahim thought. Sometimes what appears to be worthless or forgotten still has value and purpose. The same could be said of the villages and people that the world seemed ready to abandon to the insurgency. They still had worth, still had purpose, still deserved protection and hope. The journey back to Ouagadougou took several hours. Ibrahim rode in the same vehicle as Hamidou and his immediate family, wanting to hear more of their story, to understand the human cost of the crisis he was fighting against. Zainab told him about their life in Kula before the violence. It was a good life, she said softly, holding her sleeping daughter. Simple, but good. Hamidou farmed millet and sorghum. I had a small vegetable garden and sold produce at the market. Our children went to school. We had friends, family, traditions. Every market day was a celebration. Every harvest season a time of gratitude. That life is gone now. It doesn't have to be gone forever, Ibrahim said. When we defeat the insurgency, when peace returns, you can rebuild. Hamidou looked at him with an expression that was not quite belief, but perhaps the beginning of hope. Do you truly think peace will return, Mr. President? Sometimes it feels like the violence will never end. Ibrahim understood the feeling. He felt it himself in the dark hours of the night, when reports came in of another attack. Another village burned. More lives lost. But he couldn't afford to give in to despair, and he couldn't let his people give in to it either. Peace will return because we will fight for it, Ibrahim said with conviction, not just with weapons, but with our determination to preserve our way of life, our culture, our humanity. The insurgents want to destroy those things, to replace them with fear and extremism. As long as we refuse to let that happen, they cannot truly win. As they talked, Hamidou's mother, Hawa, who had been unconscious or barely coherent since her rescue, stirred and opened her eyes. The IV fluids and the air conditioning in the vehicle had helped stabilize her condition. She looked around in confusion, then her gaze settled on Ibrahim. "Where are we?" she asked in a weak voice. "You're safe, grandmother," Ibrahim said respectfully, using the term of honor for an elder. "We're traveling to Ouagadougou. You're going to receive proper medical care." Hawa's eyes filled with tears. "My son told me we were rescued. He said it was the president himself who came. I thought I was dreaming, that I had died and was imagining things. No dream, grandmother. So you're very much alive, and you're going to stay that way." She reached out a trembling hand, and Ibrahim took it gently. "Bless you," she whispered. "May God protect you, as you have protected us." The words, simple and heartfelt, struck Ibrahim deeply. This was why he did what he did, why he had taken the enormous risk of leading a coup, why he worked 18-hour days despite exhaustion. It was for people like Hawa, like Hamidou and Zainab and their children, for all the ordinary Burkinabe people who deserve to live without fear, to have hope for the future. Chapter 5. As the convoy approached Ouagadougou in the late afternoon, the contrast between the rural areas and the capital became stark. Traffic increased, buildings grew taller and more numerous. The sounds of the city replaced the quiet of the countryside. For the displaced families, who had spent their entire lives in small villages, it was overwhelming. "So many people," Hamidou murmured, watching the crowded streets pass by the window. "I've never seen so many in one place. The capital is home to over 2 million people now," Ibrahim explained. "Many of them are displaced like you, seeking safety and opportunity. It's crowded, yes, and sometimes chaotic, but it's also where we're building our future." They arrived at Camp Wemtenga, one of the larger facilities for internally displaced persons in Ouagadougou. It was not luxurious by any means. Rows of temporary structures providing basic shelter, communal areas for cooking and washing, aid distribution points. But it was organized, clean, and most importantly, safe. A medical team was waiting as promised, and they immediately took charge of Hawa and the children, moving them to the camp's health clinic for examination and treatment. Hamidou and Zainab were shown to a family unit, a small room with mattresses on the floor, basic supplies, and access to communal facilities. It was modest, but after 3 days in a well and weeks of fleeing through the bush, it seemed like a palace. Ibrahim stayed to ensure the families were properly settled, speaking with the camp administrators about their needs and checking on the medical care being provided. Hawa was admitted for overnight observation, severely dehydrated, but expected to make a full recovery with proper fluids and rest. The children were also dehydrated and malnourished but resilient, already showing improvement with treatment. As evening fell over the city, Ibrahim sat with Hamidou in the small courtyard area of the camp. Other displaced families were gathering for the evening meal, and the smell of cooking fires and porridge filled the air. Children played nearby, their laughter a reminder that even in difficult circumstances, life found a way to continue. "What will you do now?" Ibrahim asked. "Will you try to return to your village eventually, or will you start over here?" Hamidou was quiet for a long time, watching his children eat their first proper meal in days. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "A part of me wants to go back, to reclaim our land, to rebuild what was destroyed. That's our home, our ancestors' land. But another part of me thinks of the danger, of my children growing up in fear. What kind of life is that?" "It's a question many people are facing," Ibrahim acknowledged, "and there's no easy answer. The government is working to secure more areas, to make it possible for people to return safely. But it's a slow process, and the insurgents are adaptive and determined. I can't promise that Kula will be safe again soon." "Then I think we will stay here for now," Hamidou said. "I'll find work, any work. My wife can perhaps find something in the markets. We'll send our children to school if there's a school that will take them. We'll build a new life, and maybe someday when peace truly returns, we can go home." Ibrahim nodded, respecting the man's pragmatic decision. Before he left, he made sure Hamidou had his personal phone number, telling him to call if the family encountered problems or needed assistance. It was an unusual gesture for a president, but Ibrahim had never been a conventional leader. That night, back at the presidential residence, Ibrahim sat at his desk writing. He was composing a statement about the day's events, about the rescue at Tinakov, but he was struggling with how to frame it. His communications director had suggested it could be good publicity, a humanizing story about the president personally overseeing the rescue of displaced persons. But Ibrahim didn't want it to be about him. He wanted it to be about the reality of the displacement crisis, about the 8 people who nearly died in a dry well, about the thousands of villages like Tinakov struggling to survive, about the millions of displaced persons trying to rebuild their lives. He wanted people to understand that this wasn't just statistics and reports. It was human beings with names and faces and stories. After several drafts, he settled on a simple statement. He described the rescue factually, praised the quick thinking of his security team, mentioned the brave dog whose barking had saved lives. He spoke about the need for continued support for displaced persons, for resources to help villages like Tinakov improve their infrastructure and security. He called on international partners to not forget Burkina Faso, and on his fellow citizens to show compassion to those who had lost everything. The statement was released the next morning and was picked up by national and international media. But what surprised everyone was what Ibrahim did next. He announced that he would be donating his presidential salary for the next 3 months to fund improvements at Camp Wemtenga and other displacement facilities in Ouagadougou. It wasn't a fortune. Presidential salaries in Burkina Faso were modest compared to other nations, but it was significant, enough to provide additional medical equipment, educational materials for children, and job training programs for displaced adults. The gesture sparked a wave of donations from ordinary Burkinabe citizens, each giving what they could afford. A market woman in Bobo Dioulasso sent money to buy school supplies. A businessman in Ouagadougou pledged to create jobs specifically for displaced persons. A group of students at the University of Ouagadougou organized a fundraiser. It was modest in total amount, but massive in what it represented, a nation coming together to help its most vulnerable members. Chapter 6. 3 weeks after the rescue, Ibrahim received a call from Hamidou. "Mr. President, I hope I'm not disturbing you." The man's voice was nervous on the phone. "Of course not," Ibrahim said warmly. "How is your family doing? How is your mother?" "Everyone is well, thanks to God and thanks to you. My mother has fully recovered. The children are enrolled in a school near the camp. My wife found work helping in a community garden project, and I have news. Good news, I hope. I've been hired by a construction company. They're building houses in a new development, and they were looking for workers. When they learned I had farming experience and was willing to learn, they gave me a chance. It's hard work, but honest work, and the pay is enough to support my family. We're even starting to save a little money. Ibrahim felt genuine joy at this news. Hamidou, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you and your family. There's more, Hamidou continued. I spoke with some of the other families from our village who also fled. We've been thinking. Those of us who are finding stability here in Ouagadougou, we want to send support back to the villages, to the people who couldn't leave. We want to organize a network, a way to get resources to the areas still controlled by or threatened by insurgents. Do you think this is possible? Ibrahim was impressed by the idea. It aligned perfectly with his vision of Burkinabe people helping each other, of not waiting for government or international organizations to solve every problem. It's not only possible, it's brilliant. Let me connect you with some NGOs and community organizations who are already doing similar work. Together, you can create something really effective. Over the following months, Hamidou's initiative grew into a formal organization called Solidarity Bridge, connecting displaced persons in cities with their communities of origin. They sent money, supplies, and information, creating a lifeline for people in areas where traditional aid struggled to reach. Ibrahim highlighted the organization in several speeches, holding it up as an example of Burkinabe resilience and community spirit. Meanwhile, back in Tin Akof, changes were also happening. The story of the rescue had brought attention to the village's plight, and a coalition of NGOs partnered with the government to drill a new borehole, ensuring reliable water access. A mobile clinic was established, visiting the village weekly to provide basic health care. Most significantly, a small contingent of soldiers was permanently stationed there, providing security and allowing displaced persons from the surrounding area to gradually return. Musa, the boy whose dog had been the hero of the rescue, became something of a local celebrity. Wassa, the brave dog, was well fed by villagers who now saw him as good luck. Musa himself received a scholarship to attend a boarding school in a safer region, an opportunity that would have been impossible before the president's visit brought attention to Tinikoff. 6 months after the rescue, Ibrahim made another unannounced visit to Tinikoff. This time, the village was transformed. Not prosperous, not fully recovered, but alive in a way it hadn't been during his first visit. Children played in the streets, women gathered at the new well, men discussed plans for planting season. Chief Umaru greeted him with genuine warmth. "Mr. President, welcome back. You can see we have changed since your last visit." They walked through the village together, and Umaru showed him all the improvements. The school had been reopened with a new teacher, funded partially by Solidarity Bridge donations. The market had more vendors and more goods. Several families had returned from displacement. "We still have challenges," Umaru admitted. "Security is better but not perfect. We still worry about attacks, but we have hope now, something we didn't have before." Ibrahim asked about the old well, and they walked to where it stood. The makeshift wooden covers had been replaced with a proper concrete cap with a locked metal grate, allowing air circulation but preventing anyone from falling in. A small plaque had been mounted on the side. Ibrahim leaned closer to read it. "This well, long thought useless, sheltered 8 souls in their hour of need and led to their rescue on December 15th. May it remind us that nothing and no one is without value and purpose." Ibrahim was moved by the inscription. He asked who had written it. "The teacher," Umaru said. "She thought it was important that the children learn the story, understand what happened here." As they stood by the well, Wassa appeared as if summoned by memory. The dog looked healthier now, well-fed and content. He came to Ibrahim, tail wagging, and the president knelt to pet him. "You're a good dog, Wassa. You did something remarkable." Wassa, of course, didn't understand the words, but he seemed to understand the affection, leaning into Ibrahim's touch. As Ibrahim prepared to leave Tinikoff for the second time, he felt something he hadn't felt in months, genuine optimism. The problems Burkina Faso faced were still enormous. The insurgency continued, though there had been some military successes. Millions remained displaced, food insecurity persisted, and the international community's attention was often elsewhere. But small victories mattered. 8 lives saved, 1 village revitalized, 1 organization created to help others, 1 dog whose persistence made a difference. These were the threads from which a nation's recovery could be woven. That evening, in a speech to the nation, Ibrahim told the full story of the rescue at Tinakov. He spoke about Hamidou and his family, about Wassa, the brave dog, about the villagers who had endured, about the security team who had risked themselves to pull strangers from a well. "We face dark times," Ibrahim concluded, "but darkness is defeated not by waiting for dawn, but by lighting whatever candles we can. Some of us light big candles, leading nations or commanding armies. Some light small candles, rescuing families or caring for neighbors, but every light matters. Every act of courage, compassion, and persistence pushes back the darkness." If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you more and more content. The Forum. Chapter 7. The story of the rescue resonated across Burkina Faso and beyond. International media picked it up, drawn by the dramatic elements: a president personally overseeing a rescue, a heroic dog, families saved at the last moment. But more importantly, it resonated with ordinary Burkinabe people who saw themselves in Hamidou's family, who understood the desperation of fleeing violence, who knew what it meant to survive against odds. Ibrahim began to notice a shift in public mood. People approached him differently when he made public appearances, not just with respect for his position, but with a personal connection. "My brother was displaced like that family," one woman told him at a market. "Your story gave us hope that he might be found and helped too." A farmer in another region stopped him during a village visit. "I have a dog like Wassa," he said. "Never thought much of him before, just a village dog, but now I appreciate him more. He guards our compound, warns us of danger. Small things can make big differences." The philosophical insight from an unassuming farmer struck Ibrahim. Indeed, small things could make big differences. A dog's persistence, a decision to check an abandoned well, a willingness to redirect limited resources to help 8 people when millions needed help. Each small decision, each small action, contributed to a larger pattern of care and community, but the attention also brought challenges. Critics, both within Burkina Faso and internationally, questioned whether the president should be involving himself in individual rescue operations when the country faced systemic crises. Some political opponents suggested it was a publicity stunt designed to distract from military setbacks against the insurgency. Ibrahim addressed these criticisms directly in an interview with a regional news outlet. "Leadership isn't just about the big policies and grand strategies," he said. "It's also about seeing the humanity in the people you serve, about being willing to get your hands dirty when needed. Yes, we have systemic problems that require systemic solutions, but we also have human beings who need help right now, today, in this moment. I refuse to be a president who's so focused on strategy that I forget about the individual people those strategies are meant to serve." The interview was widely shared, and public opinion polls showed that Ibrahim's approval ratings, already strong, increased further. People appreciated a leader who seemed to genuinely care about ordinary citizens, who wasn't afraid to kneel in the dirt beside a well to help rescue trapped families. Meanwhile, Hamidou's Solidarity Bridge organization continued to grow. What had started as a small group of displaced persons trying to help their home villages had evolved into a sophisticated network with hundreds of volunteers. They had partnered with humanitarian organizations to establish supply routes into conflict-affected areas, created communication networks to help separated families find each other, and even begun advocacy work to ensure displaced persons' voices were heard in policy discussions. Ibrahim met regularly with Hamidou and other Solidarity Bridge leaders, listening to their insights from the ground level about what displaced communities truly needed. These conversations informed his policy decisions, making them more responsive to actual needs rather than theoretical models. One particular meeting stood out. Hamidou and several other Solidarity Bridge members came to the presidential residence with a proposal. "Mr. President Yuan," Hamidou began, "we've been thinking about the long-term future. Many of us displaced persons want to return home eventually, but we're also realistic. Some areas may not be safe for years. Some villages have been completely destroyed. So we have an idea. He unrolled a map showing an area in the relatively secure southern region of Burkina Faso. What if we created a new settlement here? Not a refugee camp, but an actual village. Displaced persons could build homes, establish farms, create a real community. Those who can eventually return to their original villages would have that option, but those who can't, or who choose not to, would have a permanent alternative, a place to call home again. Ibrahim studied the map, his mind racing through the logistics, the challenges, the potential. It's ambitious, he said. Creating a new village from scratch requires resources, planning, infrastructure, water, electricity, roads, schools, healthcare facilities. We know, Hamidou acknowledged. That's why we're proposing a partnership. Solidarity Bridge members would provide labor and local knowledge. We'd build the houses, plant the crops, establish the community. But we'd need government support for infrastructure and land rights, and we'd need international donor support for materials and expertise. It was exactly the kind of innovative thinking Ibrahim wanted to encourage. Rather than waiting for solutions to be provided, these displaced persons were proposing to create their own future, asking only for the resources and support to make it possible. Let me take this to my ministers, Ibrahim said. Let's see what we can put together. I make no promises, but I like the direction of your thinking. People taking control of their own destinies. That's how we rebuild Burkina Faso. Over the next several months, the New Village Project, as it came to be called, took shape. The government provided land rights and committed to basic infrastructure. Several international NGOs, impressed by the community-driven approach, pledged funding for materials and technical support. Burkinabe citizens, inspired by the project, donated money and expertise. Engineers volunteered to design efficient layouts for houses and irrigation systems. Teachers committed to moving to the new village once it was established. Doctors pledged to establish a clinic. The groundbreaking ceremony was held on a hot morning in June, almost exactly a year after the rescue at Tinikoff. Ibrahim was there, along with Hamidou, Zainab, and their children. Hawa, now fully recovered and spry despite her years, planted the first post for what would become the village's community center. This is more than just a new village, Ibrahim told the assembled crowd of displaced persons, government officials, and NGO representatives. This is a statement about who we are as a people. When faced with crisis and displacement, we don't simply accept defeat. We adapt, we innovate, we build new futures while honoring our past. This village will stand as a symbol of Burkinabe resilience for generations to come. Chapter 8. As construction on the new village progressed through the year, Ibrahim continued his regular visits to displacement camps and conflict-affected regions. Each visit brought new stories, new insights into the challenges his people faced. He met a widow in Dori, who had lost her husband to insurgent violence, but was raising 6 children alone with dignity and determination. He encountered a young man in Kaya who had lost both legs to a landmine, but was teaching mathematics to displaced children from a wheelchair. Each story reinforced his conviction that the Burkinabe people possessed extraordinary resilience. They needed security, resources, and opportunity, but they didn't lack courage or determination. During one visit to a displacement camp in Kaudougou, Ibrahim was approached by an old man who claimed to have a message for him. The man, who introduced himself as Boubacar, said he had been a village chief before fleeing insurgent attacks. "Our young president," Boubacar said, his weathered face serious, "I have watched you these past years. I see your heart is good, your intentions pure, but I worry you carry too much weight alone. Even the strongest baobab tree needs healthy roots to withstand the storm. Make sure you have good people around you, people who tell you truth even when it's difficult to hear." Ibrahim was struck by the wisdom in the old man's words. "Do you think I'm not listening to good advice, grandfather?" he asked respectfully. "I think you listen to many voices, which is wise. But I also think the burden of leadership can make a man isolated, even surrounded by people. Don't let your position separate you from understanding the common experience. Stay connected to people like me, like the families in these camps, like the villagers struggling in remote areas. That connection will keep you grounded and effective." The conversation stayed with Ibrahim for days afterward. He realized that while he made efforts to visit communities and listen to people, there was always a distance created by his position. People spoke to him differently because he was president. They filtered their words, showed their best face. hesitated to share the full truth of their struggles. He decided to do something unusual. Once a month, he would spend a day in civilian clothes, minimal security, visiting places without announcement. He would talk to people in markets, in displacement camps, in villages, not as the president, but as a fellow Burkinabe trying to understand the reality of life during the crisis. His security team was horrified by the idea. "Mr. President, it's too dangerous," Colonel Sawadogo protested. "The insurgents would love nothing more than to capture or kill you. And even beyond that threat, there's the risk of accidents, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time during a firefight. Life is dangerous for every Burkinabe right now," Ibrahim countered. "Farmers risk death going to their fields. Mothers risk death taking their children to health clinics. If they can live with that danger every day, I can accept it one day a month." They compromised. Ibrahim would go in civilian clothes with a very small, plainclothes security detail keeping discreet distance. He wouldn't announce his destination even to most of his staff. The trips would be planned with security considerations, but would still allow for genuine interaction with ordinary people. The first such trip took him to a market in Banfora, a town in the southwestern region. Dressed in simple local clothing, a cap pulled low over his face, Ibrahim moved through the crowded stalls buying vegetables, stopping to chat with vendors, listening to conversations around him. "Prices keep going up," one woman complained to her friend as Ibrahim pretended to examine tomatoes nearby. "My husband's salary hasn't increased, but everything costs more. How are we supposed to feed our children? The government says they're fighting for us, but all I see is more soldiers and less food," her friend replied. "I'm not saying the insurgents are right, God forbid, but when will this fighting end? When will life go back to normal?" Ibrahim resisted the urge to defend his policies, to explain the economic pressures caused by the conflict, the international sanctions, the disrupted trade routes. Instead, he just listened, learning how his decisions played out in the daily lives of ordinary people. He bought vegetables from the complaining woman, paying slightly more than she asked. "Times are hard," he said simply. "We all do what we can." The woman took his money with a slight smile. "Thank you, brother. At least there are still good people trying to make honest livings." Throughout the day, Ibrahim gathered insights. He learned that cooking oil was becoming prohibitively expensive, that children in some schools were going without midday meals, that transportation costs were preventing farmers from getting goods to market, creating food waste in some areas while other areas faced shortages. Each piece of information was a puzzle piece, helping him understand the full picture of how the crisis affected daily life. On his way back to the vehicle that would return him to Ouagadougou, Ibrahim passed a small radio repair shop. An old man sat outside, working on a transistor radio while listening to a news broadcast. The broadcaster was discussing recent government policies, and the old repairman was providing his own running commentary to no one in particular. "President says we must be patient while they secure the territory." Patient. We've been patient for years. My grandson can't go to school because the school is closed. My daughter can't go to the health clinic because it's too dangerous. How much more patience do they want? Ibrahim paused. "May I ask you something, grandfather?" The old man looked up, squinting at him. "Ask away, young man. If you were president, what would you do differently?" The repairman snorted. "If I were president, first, I'd make sure the soldiers had proper equipment. My neighbor's son is in the army. Says they don't have enough ammunition, enough vehicles. How can they fight effectively like that? Second, I'd focus on protecting the villages, not just reclaiming territory. What good is controlling empty land if all the people have fled? Third," he paused, his expression softening. "Third, I'd make sure people knew I actually cared about them, not just as voters or citizens, but as human beings with families and dreams." "And do you think the current president cares?" Ibrahim asked quietly. The old man was quiet for a long moment. I think he might. I saw him on television, that story about rescuing those people from the well. A president who gets his hands dirty like that, who spends time with displaced persons. Maybe he does care, but caring isn't enough. He needs to translate that care into results. We need security, food, education, healthcare. Good intentions don't fill empty stomachs or protect villages from attacks. Ibrahim thanked the man and continued walking, the words echoing in his mind. Caring wasn't enough. He needed results. The challenge was that results took time. Required resources Burkina Faso didn't have in abundance, depended on defeating an enemy that melted into the population and struck from the shadows. Chapter 9. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim called an emergency cabinet meeting. He shared what he had learned from his day in Banfora, not attributing the information to his undercover visit, but presenting it as intelligence gathered through various sources. "We're losing the economic battle even as we make progress in security," he told his ministers. "Food prices are making life impossible for ordinary families. Our soldiers need better equipment. Our people need to see concrete improvements in their daily lives, not just promises of future security." The discussion that followed was intense and sometimes heated. The Minister of Finance explained the constraints: international sanctions from some Western countries, reduced trade due to security concerns, the enormous cost of military operations consuming budget that might otherwise go to social programs. The Minister of Defense pushed back, arguing that without security, no other progress was possible, that military spending had to be the priority. Ibrahim listened to all sides, then made his decision. "We need a two-track approach. Yes, security is essential, and military operations will continue to receive funding. But we're also going to launch what I'm calling the Daily Life Initiative, small targeted interventions to ease the burden on ordinary families while we work on the bigger security picture." He outlined his vision: subsidized cooking oil and basic goods for the poorest families, support for local farmers to increase production and get goods to market, repair and reopening of closed schools and health clinics in areas that had been secured, mobile services for areas still too dangerous for permanent facilities. It wasn't comprehensive, it wasn't a complete solution, but it was something concrete that would improve lives now. The cabinet approved the initiative, and within weeks, the first programs launched. Cooking oil prices dropped as government subsidies kicked in. Transportation support helped farmers move their goods, reducing waste and lowering prices in urban markets. A convoy of mobile health clinics began making rounds to villages without access to permanent facilities. The response was immediate and positive. People noticed the changes in their daily lives. The women in the Banfora market found they could afford to feed their families. Farmers in remote areas got their produce to customers. Sick children received treatment they would have otherwise gone without. Ibrahim continued his monthly undercover visits, each time to a different location. In Bobo Dioulasso, he worked for a day as a laborer on a construction site, listening to the workers discuss their lives and concerns. In Tenkodogo, he posed as a relative visiting the displacement camp, hearing directly how families experienced the camp administration and services. Each visit provided insights that shaped policy and priorities. 6 months after the Daily Life Initiative launched, Ibrahim received an unexpected visitor. Musa Diko, the young boy whose dog had alerted them to the trapped families, arrived at the presidential residence with his mother. Now attending school in a safer region, Musa had written a school essay about the rescue that had won a national writing competition. "Mr. President," Musa said, nervously clutching his essay, "my teacher said I should share this with you because it's about what happened in our village." Ibrahim invited them to sit and asked Musa to read his essay aloud. The boy's voice was hesitant at first, but grew stronger as he read. The essay told the story of the rescue from Musa's perspective, how he had been playing with Wassa when the dog suddenly became agitated, how Wassa had run to the well and wouldn't stop barking, how Musa had tried to call him back, but the dog refused to leave, how the boy had been annoyed with his dog until the president and his men arrived and discovered why Wassa was barking. But the essay wasn't just about the events of that day. Musa wrote about what he had learned from the experience. Before that day, and he read, "I thought important people were the ones who made big decisions in faraway offices. But I learned that being important is about paying attention to small things. It's about a dog who wouldn't stop barking. It's about a president who didn't ignore a village dog's behavior. It's about soldiers who climbed into a well to save strangers. Important isn't about being big. It's about caring enough to notice the small things that matter." When Musa finished reading, there was silence in the room. Ibrahim felt emotion welling up, moved by the wisdom in the young boy's words. "That's a beautiful essay, Musa," he said finally, "and an important lesson for all of us, including me. Sometimes I get so focused on the big challenges that I forget to notice the small things. Thank you for reminding me. He asked Musa what he wanted to do when he grew up. The boy's answer was immediate. I want to be a teacher, so I can teach other children what I learned, about paying attention to small things and caring about others. Ibrahim promised to support Musa's education, ensuring he could continue in good schools and eventually attend university if he wished. But more than that, he asked if Musa would be willing to share his essay more widely, perhaps record it for radio broadcast. Your words could help other people understand what we're trying to build in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim explained. A society where everyone pays attention, where everyone cares, where everyone does their part no matter how small. Musa agreed, and within weeks, his essay was being broadcast on national radio and shared in schools across the country. It became part of the curriculum, a teaching tool about civic responsibility and the power of individual actions. Teachers used it to discuss everything from animal welfare to community service to the importance of persistence. Satu, Chapter 10. 2 years after the rescue at Tinakov, the new village project reached a milestone. The first 20 families moved into completed homes. The village, now officially named Wassa Village Kesem in honor of the dog whose persistence had inspired the entire chain of events, was far from complete, but it was functional. Homes stood in neat rows, built from locally sourced materials using sustainable techniques. A central well provided clean water, powered by a solar pump. A school building stood ready for students. A health clinic, staffed by a nurse and visited weekly by a doctor, served the community. Hamidou and his family were among the first to move in. His construction work in Ouagadougou had taught him valuable skills, and he had been instrumental in the actual building of the village. Now he would farm again, working land that wasn't his ancestral home, but could become home for his children. The dedication ceremony was a major event, attended by government officials, international donors, NGO representatives, and of course, Ibrahim. But the real stars of the day were the displaced families who had worked to make the village a reality. They had provided labor, shared expertise, made countless decisions about layout and design, turned an empty field into a living community. This village represents a new model, Ibrahim said in his dedication speech. Not of waiting for help to arrive, but of people taking control of their own futures with support from government and partners. The families here didn't just wait to be rescued and resettled, they rescued themselves. They resettled themselves. We just provided the tools and resources to make it possible. After the formal ceremony, there was a celebration with traditional music, dancing, and food. Ibrahim noticed Wassa, the original hero dog, being led around by Musa, who had come from his boarding school for the event. The dog wore a ceremonial collar made specially for the occasion, and children surrounded him, petting him and asking Musa to tell the story of the rescue again and again. He doesn't really understand what all the fuss is about, Musa told Ibrahim with a grin. He just knows he's getting lots of attention and extra food, but I think that's okay. He did something important without knowing it was important. Isn't that kind of heroism the best kind? Ibrahim laughed, charmed by the boy's philosophical insight. You're going to be a wise teacher someday, Musa. Your students will be lucky to have you. As evening approached and the celebration continued, Ibrahim found himself walking through the village with Hamidou. They looked at the homes under construction, discussed plans for expansion, talked about the challenges still ahead. Sometimes I think about that day in the well, Hamidou said quietly. How close we came to dying there. If Wassa hadn't kept barking, if you hadn't decided to check the well, if your soldiers hadn't been able to get us out. So many small things that could have gone differently. But they didn't, Ibrahim reminded him. The small things aligned, and here we are. You're alive. Your family is safe, and you're helping build something that will help hundreds of other families. That matters, Hamidou. That makes a real difference. I sometimes feel like I should do more, Hamidou admitted. So many people are still suffering. So many are still displaced or living in danger. What we've done here is good, but it's just a drop in the ocean. Ibrahim stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Hamidou, do you remember what you told me when I asked what you would do after being rescued? You said you would find work, support your family, and build a new life. You've done all of that and more. You created Solidarity Bridge. You helped build this entire village. You've probably impacted thousands of lives through your work. How can you say that's not enough? Hamidou was quiet, considering, I suppose I want the suffering to end for everyone, not just for those we can help directly. We all want that, Ibrahim said, but we can't let the enormity of the challenge paralyze us. We do what we can, where we can, with what we have. That's all any of us can do. And if everyone does that, if everyone contributes their small part, eventually it adds up to something transformative. They continued walking, and Ibrahim pointed to a house where a family was settling in for their first night. Through the window, they could see children laughing, parents unpacking belongings, the small rituals of making a space into a home. That family has a future now, because of what you helped build. Multiple that by the number of families in this village, then multiply it by the family's solidarity bridge has helped. The numbers add up. Hamidou. The impact is real. That night, Ibrahim stayed in Wassa village rather than returning to Ouagadougou. He wanted to experience the community as it began its life, to be present for this moment of new beginning. He slept in one of the completed guest houses, a simple room but comfortable. As he lay in bed, he could hear the sounds of the village settling in for the night, children being told bedtime stories, adults discussing plans for the next day, the normal sounds of life that had been absent from these families for so long. He thought about the journey that had led to this moment, starting with a dog's persistent barking at a dry well. Who could have predicted that a simple rescue operation would catalyze so much positive change? The creation of Solidarity Bridge, the Daily Life Initiative, the new village project, all of it traced back to that moment when he decided to investigate why a village dog wouldn't stop barking. It reinforced something Ibrahim had long believed. In complex crises with no clear solutions, sometimes the best approach was to respond to immediate human needs and trust that addressing those needs would open doors to larger solutions. You couldn't plan for every contingency, couldn't strategize every step. Sometimes you just had to pay attention, to care, and to act when action was needed. Depict Chapter 11. The success of Wassa village attracted international attention. Journalists came to document the community-driven approach to resettlement. Development experts studied the model, wondering if it could be replicated elsewhere. Donors who had been hesitant to invest in Burkina Faso, due to security concerns, found in Wassa village a concrete, successful project they could support. Within a year of the first families moving in, 3 more similar villages were in various stages of development in different regions of Burkina Faso. Each adapted the model to local conditions and needs, but all shared the core principle: displaced persons as active participants in creating their own futures rather than passive recipients of aid. The model also evolved based on experience. The second village included vocational training facilities from the start. The third incorporated more extensive agricultural support. Each iteration improved on the last, learning from challenges and successes. Ibrahim continued his dual focus, pushing forward with security operations against the insurgency, while also investing in programs that improved daily life and gave people hope. The balance wasn't always easy. There were setbacks in both areas. Security operations sometimes resulted in civilian casualties, drawing criticism and protest. Economic programs struggled with corruption and inefficiency in some implementations, but there were also victories. Several regions that had been completely under insurgent control were gradually reclaimed. Not just reclaimed, but held, with government presence maintained long enough for displaced persons to begin returning. Schools reopened. Health clinics resumed operations. Markets began to function again. The international community's perception of Burkina Faso began to shift. Where once the country was seen primarily as a failed state, consumed by insurgency, it now had a more complex image. Yes, there was conflict, but there was also innovation. Yes, there was displacement, but there was also community-driven solutions. Yes, there were challenges, but there was also a young, energetic president who seemed genuinely committed to his people's welfare. 3 years after the rescue, Ibrahim was invited to speak at the African Union Summit about Burkina Faso's approach to managing displacement crises. He used the platform to tell the story of Wassa, of the families in the well, of Hamidou's transformation from desperate refugee to community leader, of Wassa village and the model it represented. "My fellow leaders," he said, "we often speak of displacement as a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed. But what if we view displaced persons not as problems, but as resources? They have skills, energy, determination. They want to rebuild their lives. Our job is not to do it for them, but to create conditions where they can do it themselves. He proposed an African-led initiative to support community-driven resettlement projects across the continent. Several countries expressed interest, and a working group was formed to develop the concept further. The initiative was informally dubbed the Wassa model by delegates, acknowledging its origins in a dog's persistence and a president's willingness to listen. Back in Burkina Faso, life in Wassa village had settled into a rhythm. Children attended school, learning not just academic subjects but also practical skills like sustainable agriculture and water management. Adults worked farms that were beginning to produce decent yields, benefiting from agricultural training and better access to markets through solidarity bridge connections. The village had developed its own culture, a blend of traditions from the various ethnic groups represented among the displaced families. They celebrated festivals from multiple traditions, cooked dishes from different regions, spoke multiple languages interchangeably. It was Burkina Faso in microcosm, diverse but unified by shared experience and common purpose. Hamidou had been elected as the village's first chief, a position he accepted with humility. His leadership style was collaborative, always consulting with elders and community members before making major decisions. He credited his time in the well for teaching him the value of listening to all voices. When you're trapped in the dark with other people, he told Ibrahim during one visit, you learn that everyone's perspective matters. The children noticed things the adults missed. The elderly had wisdom from experience. Everyone contributed to our survival. I try to lead the village the same way. Ibrahim was impressed by how Hamidou had grown into his role. The frightened refugee pulled from a well had become a confident community leader, someone other displaced persons looked to for guidance and inspiration. It was a transformation that mirrored what Ibrahim hoped for Burkina Faso itself, from crisis to stability, from fear to hope, from destruction to renewal. Musa, now a teenager, had returned to Wassa village for a school break. He had grown tall, his voice had deepened, but he still carried the same thoughtful demeanor Ibrahim remembered from their first meeting. Wassa, the dog, was older now, moving more slowly, content to lie in the shade while children played around him. Wassa doesn't do much anymore, Musa told Ibrahim, but the children here treat him like a grandfather. They know his story, know what he did. It makes them think about how they can make a difference too, even when they're small and feel powerless. Ibrahim watched the old dog, peacefully sleeping despite the activity around him, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was legacy, not just his own but Wassa's, Hamidou's, every person who had contributed to the chain of events that created this village. Legacy wasn't just what you built with your own hands, it was the ripples you created that others caught and amplified. That evening, the village organized a ceremony to mark the 3rd anniversary of the rescue. All 8 people who had been trapped in the well were there, along with members of Ibrahim's security team who had participated in the rescue, Chief Umaru from Tinakov, and many others whose lives had been touched by the events of that day. Chapter 12. Stories were shared. Some Ibrahim had heard before, others new to him. He learned that Zainab, Chin Hamidou's wife, had become a teacher at the village school, using her experiences to teach children about resilience and adaptation. Hawa, the elderly mother, had become the village's unofficial grandmother, caring for children while their parents worked, sharing traditional stories and wisdom. The 2 children who had been trapped in the well were now healthy and thriving, with no apparent trauma from their ordeal. One of the security team members who had helped with the rescue stood to speak. I've participated in many operations during my military career, he said. Combat missions, security patrols, all kinds of challenges. But the rescue at Tinakov remains the most meaningful thing I've ever done. In that moment, we weren't soldiers following orders. We were human beings helping other human beings survive. It reminded me why we serve, what we're really fighting for. The ceremony concluded with a traditional blessing led by religious leaders from multiple faiths represented in the village. They prayed for continued peace, prosperity, and for the day when all displaced persons could return home or find new homes with dignity. As the gathering dispersed, Ibrahim found himself alone with the original well structure that had been transported to Wassa village and installed as a monument in the central square. The concrete cap remained, but the sides had been decorated with a mural depicting the rescue and the village's creation. He traced his fingers over the painted images. remembering that hot December day when he had heard voices from below, and everything had changed. Still thinking about that day, a voice asked behind him. Ibrahim turned to find Hamidou approaching. Always, Ibrahim admitted. It was a turning point for me, a reminder of why I do what I do. For me too, Hamidou said. In that well, I thought we were going to die. I had made peace with it, was just praying for my children to somehow survive even if I didn't. Then suddenly, impossibly, rescue came. It taught me that you can't predict what will happen. You can only keep hoping and keep trying. They stood together in comfortable silence, two men from very different backgrounds brought together by circumstance and bound by shared experience. What's next for you? Ibrahim asked. Any plans beyond leading the village? Hamidou smiled. Solidarity Bridge wants me to help establish similar organizations in other regions. They think the model we created here in Wassa village could work elsewhere, and they need people with experience to help make it happen. I'm considering it, but I don't want to abandon the village either. We'll see. Whatever you decide, you'll do it well, Ibrahim said with certainty. You've already proven you can turn crisis into opportunity, despair into hope. I learned that from you, Mr. President. You could have ignored a barking dog, could have assumed it was nothing important, but you paid attention, you investigated, you cared enough to check. That small decision saved 8 lives and created all of this. Ibrahim shook his head. I just responded to what was in front of me. You and the others. You did the hard work of survival, of rebuilding, of creating something new. Don't give me credit for your accomplishments. We can both take credit, Hamidou suggested. Leadership and community working together, each doing their part. That's how real change happens. It was a fitting summary of the philosophy that had emerged from the rescue at Tinakov and everything that followed. Not top-down solutions imposed by government, nor bottom-up initiatives without support, but a partnership where each level contributed what it could and supported the efforts of others. As night fell over Wassa village, Ibrahim prepared to return to Ouagadougou. Before leaving, he made one final stop at the school to see Musa's famous essay, now framed and hanging on the wall of the main classroom. Reading it again, he was struck anew by the young boy's wisdom about paying attention to small things that matter. In the morning, Ibrahim would return to the capital and the endless challenges of governing a nation in crisis. There would be security briefings, economic reports, political maneuvering, difficult decisions with no perfect answers. But he would carry with him the lessons of Wassa village, that small actions matter, that people are resilient when given support, that hope can be built even from the depths of despair. The story that had begun with a dog's barking at a dry well had become a story about an entire nation's capacity for renewal. It wasn't a complete story yet. Burkina Faso still faced enormous challenges. The insurgency continued, though with less intensity in some areas. Displacement remained a massive problem, though the numbers were gradually decreasing as secure areas expanded. Economic struggles persisted, though programs like the Daily Life Initiative provided some relief. But there was movement, progress, hope, and sometimes, in the midst of seemingly insurmountable challenges, that was enough. That was something to build on. As Ibrahim's convoy pulled away from Wassa village, he looked back at the lights of the homes, the smoke rising from cooking fires, the sound of life being lived. He thought about Wassa the dog, now old and content, who had persisted in barking until someone listened. He thought about Hamidou and his family, who had survived impossible odds and turned their survival into service for others. He thought about all the people across Burkina Faso who, like them, refused to give up despite everything, and he renewed his commitment to them to continue fighting for their security, their prosperity, their future, to keep paying attention to the small things that mattered, to keep listening for the voices crying out from dark places, to keep believing that even in the driest wells, even in the hardest times, hope could still be found. The dog had barked. The president had listened. 8 people had been saved. A village had been born. And Burkina Faso, one small victory at a time, was finding its way toward healing. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, because the story wasn't over, but it was a beginning. And beginnings held their own kind of magic. The end.